Okay, hello again everyone, this is Esweb. Hello, particularly my inspiration for this project, my granny. I'm back again to read part 2 of chapter 2, The Third Metropolis by William Hasrell. Special shout out to my radical weekly partner Nathaniel for his superb video researching and editing for this project. The Third Metropolis by William Hasrell, starting at the subheading on page 45, Views of the War. A copy of the Jindu Warrabook pamphlet venture for October 1939 includes war statements by a number of Australian poets, among them James Devaney and Paul Grano. With the Nazi-Soviet pact still in place at this time, the communist-leaning Max Harris predictably condemns the European war as a contest between two imperialisms. Both Devaney and Grano strike a more mainstream note. And a side note from me here, I would say rather than mainstream, more participatory in the imperialism. Devaney declares that the poet will join up with his mates, while Grano stresses the need for the creative artist to maintain independence from the inevitable conformity of wartime. He must struggle to preserve his personality from, and must set his face against that regimentation of thinking by propaganda, which devastates the mind and soul with tornado-like thoroughness. The tone of Grano's statement is similar to some of the many pieces published in Meanjin on the appropriate cultural response to the war. Indeed, such pieces became a flourishing genre, of which Vance Palmer's battle in the Crisis number of 1942 was only the most famous. In Brisbane, the sense of crisis was particularly urgent. As well as Palmer's piece, the Crisis number included contributions in a similar vein from Brisbane intellectuals J. V. Duhigg, Colin Clark, and A. P. B. Benny. Christenson's editorial note emphasizes the intellectual and spiritual aspect of this crisis. Military victory alone will not save us if we lose the intellectual battle, and in this field the attack nowadays are heavier and more vicious than they have ever been in any previous generation. In a less direct way, this sense of intellectual crisis also lies behind the various explorations of the tensions between collectivism and individualism, often presented in dialogue form in Meanjin over these years. A visual image of this sense of crisis is offered by the conservative painter Gwendolyn Grant in her painting Fantasy of 1943. A female nude sitting on a rocky beach and a pandanus pine in the foreground provide a V-shaped frame for a line of battleships approaching the shore and threatening to penetrate the center of the picture frame. These rather hackneyed symbols, the nude of beauty and civilization in art, and the pandanus pine of Queensland, show the artist reaching back to well-worn conventions and trying to find a visual language to represent a completely new experience. For the remarkable number of poets writing and publishing in Brisbane during the war years, the moral issues associated with the war supplied a rich topic. Like Grant's painting, however, much of this poetry took a rather abstract view of these issues, often working within established rhetorical and literary conventions, and only occasionally suggesting links to specific details of life in Brisbane during the war years. Frank Francis, a contributor to both Meanjin and the Catholic literary anthology The Southwellian, and a stalwart of the QAAA, titled his 1944 poetry collection Columbus Journeyed South to celebrate the arrival of US troops in Australia. The patriotic theme is continued in the dedication, which I won't repeat here. Goes on a bit. The title poem has no hesitation in using gauche personifications in a tone that hovers between the medieval and the Homeric, as well as Francis' characteristic awkward enjambments to make its patriotic point. Columbus saw the Golden Gate recede like courtly knight from view. They turned to scan his mighty craft anew. Here was a speed undreamed of in his youth, a majesty proportioned to an age, of science in Excelsior's proudest gauge, of battle ever cast the boldest truth that might had ever fashioned out of right. And here were men who bore in youth's high honour what their fathers wore, the upright shield of light. Later in the same poem, the US-Australian alliance is presented as defending Christian thought and precept against the push for world dominion or the right to make/unmake kings. Finally, the Homeric ocean vision of the opening lines is balanced by an Australian pastoral. The visiting Americans see a winding road that leads to quiet creeks and billabongs, where kangaroo and emu strayed, where brolgas danced and bower birds played, while all the air was rich with nature songs. These final lines are an Australian version of Wordsworth's vision of pastoral serenity in the first stanza of Resolution and Independence. The jay makes answer as the magpie chatters, and the air is filled with pleasant noise of waters. The vague nature songs and the touristic list of Australian animals, however, are not strong enough to enable the poem to escape from derivative literariness. A subtler but still self-consciously literary response to the war is found in the poetry of Brian Vrepont, a contributor to the first issue of Meanjin and one of Brisbane's more flamboyant literary personalities. Vrepont's collection Beyond the Claw, published by Angus and Robertson in 1943, begins with a poem to the reader that echoes the calls for spiritual renewal in wartime issues of Meanjin, while also invoking the pastoral nostalgia standard in great war poetry of Britain. Does it come ill my book is timed with war? Maybe, yet in this perilous hour need to remember back from fang and claw to the bird's song and the flower. Characteristically, Vrepont uses an image of the violence of nature itself to highlight the power of poetry to recreate the pastoral vision of birdsong and the flower. Most of the poems in the book, however, refer not specifically to the war, but to a general sense of the fragility of human life. Sometimes this is expressed in images associated with Brisbane, as in his poem The Crabs. I laugh, knowing crabs wiser than men, when man, suicide from his home, the earth, shall see no lord spun spray gold on wave, nor moons come like vespers go in full song. Crabs still will ply their chopsticks, knowing nor caring that man is dust. A poem like Down with the Death Cry might be read as purely personal, but the particular terms used certainly suggest a response to contemporary political realities. Too authoritarian, herdish, death, praise not damn, I am too busy touching, seeing, thinking, dreaming, living life. Vrepont's engagement with the war and its zeitgeist, however, remains elliptical, mediated by dreamlike imagery and allegory. The first bomb revolves around a Blake-like allegory of a confrontation between the narrator and the god, who no longer can be found in his usual haunts, of music, wind, sun, grass, or the hilarity of tingling wine. The title and the word bombs within the poem are the only explicit links between the psychological crisis and war. The poem ends with optimism that the god will return after the bombing ends. But I feel he living waits like a god, waits, deep in the secret sanctuary of the universe, in a safe space, safe from bombs and restless springtime heads.